Today we're going to talk about an excise tax. A tax on something where the government always looks at how much of the sales there are and says, we're going to make so much money. For example, on this, and I've worked really hard to get this neat. Isn't this amazing, this graph? Knowing what you know about my lack of skills doing this by hand. So I've got this drawn, and if we look at the quantity, the equilibrium quantity is going to be along this line. Right there at 26. Okay, 26 is the equilibrium, and the price is going to be right on this one, right? Which is, oh dear, I'm touching this thing and causing problems. Okay, right at $300. So there's our equilibrium, and there are, what did I say, 26, right? So we've got 26 things sold, $300, and there's some person saying, if we put a $90 tax on this thing, we're going to make so much money. Let's see, $90 times 26, we're going to make $2,340. And so they get all excited, but what they don't realize is that the tax itself will result in less quantity being sold, so that they won't make the $2,340. I just took $90. What if they were going to put in a $90 tax? Now, I chose 90 because we have these uneven stair steps. They go up by 10 on the price side, and they go across by 1 on the quantity side. So I wanted to, since these are symmetrical, they both should have the same slope if they were a straight line, because they go up and down by the same. They go over 2 and up or down 1. Up or down 2. Over 2, down 2, over 2, down 2, etc. And the supply goes over 2, up 2, etc. So they have the same slope, so we should have a symmetrical impact of a tax. Now, you have heard, oh, well, the sellers will just pass this on to the buyers, right? There's going to be a tax on something, oh, the sellers will just pass on. It really is not that way in very many instances. Usually it's split between the two, the sellers and the buyer, and it depends upon basically the elasticities of the supply and demand curves. But for now, since I haven't taught you elasticities, just think of it as the slope, which is not the same as elasticity. But basically, if one curve is flatter than the other and one curve is steeper than the other, then that means the tax will impact differently. But it should be about equal. So I'm thinking that if you go from here, oops, hang on, let's get a fat marker here. From here, come on, there you go, right there, to there, will be 9 blocks tall. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we're going to put that tax in. A straight line 9 blocks tall would be 90. That's really ugly. Let's try that again. Oh, I don't know why it keeps wanting to do that. There. Yes. Can you see it? Okay. A tax, 9 blocks tall, would be $90 tax. The reason we do that is because that will help us determine who ends up paying the tax. What we're going to do is we're going to, in this case, we're going to say that the seller has to send in the check, which is the case in everything except like automobile purchases. When you buy an auto, you usually have to go down and pay your taxes, unless you got a deal where they would pay the tax for you. But most of the time, big purchases, the buyer has to go down and pay the tax, but little purchases, the seller does. So in other words, your sales tax, Walmart collects it, right? You don't have to go to the state and pay it, they pay it. So let's say that the seller has to send in the check. In this case, then this stair step is going to go up, for every one of these, is going to go up by 9 blocks, which is going to be a big pain. But basically, it's going to go... I'm just going to draw a part of it. Oh, hang on. See, this is a lot more difficult than it looks. Okay, something's going on. I cannot move this thing now. Oh, I had this lesson planned so perfectly, so let's see if I can get this to work. We're going to go up by 2, over by 2, up by 2. Oh, gosh. I'm going to pause this a minute and draw. That way you don't have to sit and watch me. Hang on. Okay. There you go. I didn't draw the whole thing just because I'm lazy. But I've drawn enough that you can see that basically the supply curve moves up by 9 squares. And if I did it right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Each step should be 9 higher than before, because the seller has to send in $90 for every unit that's sold. So we say the supply curve moved back, but technically it did move up to less supply. So now the partial curve that I drew, this partial curve is the new curve. So we have a new intersection and a new equilibrium. So we have a new equilibrium geez. Okay, we have a new equilibrium of where it's right on 350. Can you see it? So equilibrium was 300, and now it's 350. So the price was passed on to the consumer of $50. But the supplier still gets off of the old supply curve. Remember, they're adding $90 to what they get and sending in $350, right? And they are getting $260. So our new equilibrium price is $350. So this is what the buyer pays, right? And $260 is what the supplier gets. They still get what they were willing to supply. But the thing that we need to learn about the most is that, I don't know if you're getting to see what I see or whether you're getting the big picture. I'm moving my screen around and shrinking it and making it smaller. But on the main computer, my desktop, it's showing it sitting still. So if I say oops, it's because I slid it off to where I can't see it. Okay, so now what's interesting is that the quantity has changed. Because remember, as far as the buyer is concerned, the supply curve intersects their demand curve right there, because that's what's offered to them. But what happens is that instead of the intersection here, it's intersecting now, and see, it's off the screen for me, I have to move. It's intersecting now at 21, is that right? I don't know. I think it's intersecting at 22, but I'm going to have to hang on. Okay, it's to the left of this, to the right of this mark. It is at 21. Okay, so 21 now. So 5 less units were sold. So basically, these sales that happened before, let's see if I can do a highlighter. Very small. Okay, let's try that. These sales that happened before that were consumer surplus or producer profit, they no longer take place. Can you see that? That whole area. They no longer take place because the quantity has shifted. The quantity has shifted. That's horrible. Let's try a little. There we go. The quantity has shifted. You see it? Okay. So the quantity shifted, and those yellow highlighted, that area, that little triangle, if it was a straight line, it would be a triangle. But basically, that lost consumer surplus, remember the consumer surplus would have been the area above that line of the $300 price and below the demand curve, and the producer profit would have been the area below that line I just drew at the price and above the producer. Well, so the producer would have had profit, the consumer would have had the consumer would have had consumer surplus, and those trades don't happen now, because now only 21 trades occur, and everything to the right of 21 doesn't exist. So 5 trades didn't exist, and the government didn't get that money either. The government would get the vertical height between what the supplier gets and all this area, the area between, to the left. They get the area to the left of the quantity 21, 90 tall, right? They get a tax of 90, so they would get 90 times 1, 90, for each one of those. Are you following this idea? The area between those supply curves is tax that goes to the government. And the area above the new supply curve is now the new area for finding producer profit or consumer surplus. You see that? Okay. So we have a situation where the government is getting, let's see if I can highlight this in a different color. Well, okay, let's try this now. The government is going to get the height of the 90 above the first supply curve. So it's that area between the supply curves, 90 tall. They're going to get 90 times 1. And they're taking away from the original area, so they're getting areas that the private sector would have gotten, but they are not getting the little triangle to the right of the new intersection. So that new area, this thing is deadweight loss. Nobody gets it. The trades don't happen. So it disappears from the private sector. Wealth, happiness, profit, consumer surplus, whatever you want to call it, vanishes. The government doesn't get it because those trades didn't happen. They can't tax them. The buyers don't get a surplus. The sellers don't get a profit. Nobody gets it. And that little triangle is called dead weight loss. Also, let's look at who's paying the tax, okay? If the original price was $300 and it ends up being, the price ends up going up to $350, then the buyer paid $50 of that $90 tax. It didn't all get passed on to the buyer. And this really can hurt businesses. The business had to lower their price to what they got was $260, and at that point they could pass on the $90. They had to lower the price to $260 in order to find a point where the buyer would be willing to pay $350, basically. So they ended up paying $40, basically, and they weren't willing to provide as many quantities at $260. Remember, you can get more product supplied at a higher price, and at $260 they provided basically 5 less, and so that's how that worked out. And then at $260 they send in a check for $90, and the price ends up being $350 for the buyer. You see how that worked? This thing is called deadweight loss, and when I first set this thing up, I thought, well, okay, I can set this up so that we can actually count this, and we could, but I don't think we really need to. I think you can see it. And in fact, you could have seen it if I drew it with straight lines. I didn't really have to mess with all this. I could have just as easily drawn just something like this. And we could have just said this price, well, it's very hard for me to draw this straight. We could have said that's 300 and here's 90 tall, right? And then I could have said, okay, so now we have a new supply curve. Ta-da! And here's 350. And here's 260. And look, we have a deadweight loss. I tried to draw it so that we could actually measure the change of 90 exactly, and we could see exactly where it went through. Boy, that looks messy now. But you could, if you just really wanted to self-torture, you could go through now and you could measure consumer surplus, which would be above the $350 price, and you could measure producer profit, which is below the $350 price, and you could compare that, you could compare that with the original consumer surplus, which would have been above this part, and producer profit, which would have been below this part when there was no tax. And you would find out, yes, there is less profit for businesses, less surplus for buyers, and you can't explain the missing deadweight loss by, oh, the government gets the extra in tax, because the government still gets 5 less units worth of tax, because those five trades do not happen. So that little triangle is your deadweight loss. You got it? All right, I've got something else to teach you, but I'm gonna close this lecture and post it, and then I will soon post another lecture for you. Okay?